Hi, I'm Nafisa Nazir.
And I'm Leah Horick.
And we are Sustainability Ambassadors at Southwestern University. We created this podcast to help make our campus more sustainable.
And our world too.
So tune in every other Friday to hear more about what's happening in sustainability at SU and to learn what you can do to live a more sustainable life.
So many things, guys.
Thanks for listening.
And stay sustainable.
Good morning, Southwestern, and thank you for joining us today. Spring equinox is on the week after tomorrow, and not what better way to celebrate by discussing something that you may start to see quite often, bees and other pollinators. You might not think much of them, but bees and pollinators are actually very significant to biodiversity and overall sustainability, and it's important that we do our part to preserve their populations.
So today we are joined by Blake Butler, the Chief Operations Officer of Walker Honey Farm, a honey products business in Rogers, Texas.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Yes. So established in 1930, Walker Honey Farm operates on the philosophy of bee to bottle and strives to deliver wholesome, natural, and local honey products to the community. So thank you for joining us, Blake.
We Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yes. All right. So to start us off, what got you interested in bees and pollinators?
Well, I actually went to high school nearby in a small town called Little River Academy. And I was good friends with the owner's son. So It came summertime and I needed a job. So they said, come on out and see how you like it. It's not for everyone. It's hard work and you'll get stung. And I didn't think much of it, thought it'd be okay, and fell in love with it.
Did you get stung? Or like how quickly did it take you to get your first bee sting?
I did many times. Get used to it.
So from your perspective, like after, I know that you worked with bees for a long time. Why do you think bees and pollinators are important to overall biodiversity?
I think they're extremely important. There's really, there is no biodiversity without bees and pollinators. It's an integral part of the ecosystem to keep things running, to keep that interaction flowing. It's a symbiotic relationship, and when you take one half of a symbiotic relationship away, there's not much left. I believe it's something around 75% of crops and plants require some sort of cross-pollination, which insects are obviously a large percentage of that.
Right.
Does Walker Honey Farm lease out its beehives to pollinate crops, or are y'all just in one place?
So we did for a long time. Within the past 10 years, we've really pulled back on pollination services. One of the reasons for that is just the intense pesticide exposure. It's a really unfortunate situation in the beekeeping industry where because of foreign imported honey, domestic honey prices have dropped considerably, which means that beekeepers can no longer pay bills on just producing honey. They have to get creative and do as many different services as they can to be able to keep the doors open, and not just be able to keep the doors open. You got to feed your family, and you want to thrive. You want to have a comfortable life. You want to live well.
Yeah.
And pollination has become almost mandatory to be able to do that, unless you're in some sort of special circumstance like we are. Most beekeepers don't have the option of taking a break from pollination. But we really can't feel like we're being true to the bees and respecting them and the environment and their sustainability and participate in pollination while the load is so high. Even right now, maybe just ending, I'm not as up on it these days, but the almond pollination in California, which is the largest pollination event in the US. Of the estimated 3 million beehives in North America that are commercially kept, 2.5 million of them are in California right now.
Wow.
And so not only are you taking on this huge exposure to pesticides, but you're also getting exposure to everything else that all the other bees have. So if your bee visits the same blossom as another bee who that colony is sick, well, the odds are your bee is going to catch whatever they have. And so it just makes it very difficult for the health of the bees. One thing I can, probably get into a little bit later. I don't want to launch in too big of a segue here. But you really can't do pollination without using synthetic chemicals in your
Mm.
and so just to try and avoid this, chemical treadmill that beekeepers get on, we've chosen to kind of take a break from pollination until things get a little bit better. We've done almonds before. We did it for a long time. We've done watermelons here in Texas as well. Several different crops, but right now it's just a little scary.
Yeah.
So we choose to keep our bees as local as possible. So we have two different ecoregions that we go back and forth between. We have the Blackland Prairie, which is a thin strip of ecosystem here in Central Texas, with obviously black clay soil. That's why it's called the Blackland. And then there's the Post Oak Savanna to our east, just a couple counties over. So we go back and forth between those ecoregions. We do have some apiary locations that are just barely in the hill country west of I-35, but most of them are going to stay between the Post Oak Savanna and the Blackland Prairie. We have two different honey crops that are produced in those locations, and so we really try to move the bees as little as possible, just to really focus on the less stress the better.
It's kind of timely with COVID. I didn't really think about bee diseases, but you got to social distance the bees.
Yes. Too many bees in one place, not healthy. Not healthy
Yeah, I
at
mean, it
all.
totally makes sense. It's just not something I think you think about right away. It's like, oh, they're bees. Of course, they can get sick too. But and you mentioned that Walker Honey Farm is in a kind of special circumstance that allows you to not do pollination services. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So we have different areas of the market that we've focused on for a long time that kind of set us up to be able to weather the storm of low honey prices. We wholesale honey. We sell honey containers. The beekeepers around the state. We have a winery where we make honey wine here on site as well, and we have a retail presence. We also have presence in several grocery stores as well. And so we're talking about biodiversity. We're as diversified as we can be, so
Nice.
that when any one area does have difficulty, like the low honey prices that are plaguing the honey industry, that we're positioned in a way that we're able to still have freedom to operate how we want and not be locked into any unhealthy processes. It's such a I know it's about pollinators, and pollination is extremely important.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have this area of having to step back from that right now.
I mean, it's better for the overall pollination. Like pollinating crops is one thing, but also pollinating just the local ecosystem as well.
Yeah, it's difficult. Here in Texas, obviously, Central Texas, we have tons of corn. Even though corn is everywhere, a little bit of cotton and some other crops as well. There is a lot of cattle grazing land. And so even though there's quite a few row crops that are going in, there's still plenty of forage land. We're not up against some of the things that beekeepers a little further north, especially in the Midwest, are up against, where, as far as you can see, it's some sort of monoculture of a crop. And every square inch of land is being used to plant and grow that thing. That's really, really tough on the bees, not just for the diversity of species, but it's tough on the bees because they require diversity in their diet. Different plants have different mineral content, different fat, different amino acids in the pollen. And so if you just have one type of pollen that your bees are foraging, they're still going to have some sort of deficiency in their diet. So diversity it's just important, us having diversity in our diet. If we just ate corn, there's going to be some things that we're missing.
Yeah, definitely. That's like that movie with Matthew McConaughey. which
Scene in
what is-
Interstellar.
Interstellar,
It's just
yeah, where it's
corn
like the
everywhere.
future where like the only crop that's still around is corn and it's all like genetically the same.
It's not far off.
Ugh.
So you talked about how Walker Honey Farm like preserves their bee populations. What actions has it done to actually like preserve bee and pollinator populations?
So for our bees, we talked a little bit about stepping back from pollination. The biggest thing that we're focused on is the health of our bees.
Okay.
I started beekeeping shortly after the golden age, which was pre-1990s,
Mhm.
when it was the biggest trouble you had was keeping them from swarming, which is a
Right.
problem of too many bees, which
Yeah.
now
Not a thing you hear about very much
no,
these days.
no, it's really not. And the amount of money people made was just drastically more compared to what's available now, just because of the overall health of bees.
Mhm.
And for a long time, I remember when colony collapse disorder, CCD, came out, and everyone is trying to figure out what's going on, what it could be. I mean, they were talking about power lines and cell phone towers and all different sorts of things that people
Yeah.
are speculating.
Mhm.
And it's pretty clear now that the bees are really suffering from a chronic overload, due to being unable to operate at full capacity due to pesticides.
Mm.
Right.
And so, although the testing of the pesticides, especially back then, was just this short exposure of, okay, how many bees died from exposure in X time period,
Mhm.
it didn't really take into consideration, what brood exposure to the larvae. What
Mm.
does this do when it sits in the pollen and is fed to queens? How does that
Yeah.
impact fertility? There's studies now that it's inhibiting bees' ability to sleep. It's inhibiting their ability to process iron in their diet. And so it's basically amounting to weakened immune systems.
Mm.
When you have a weakened immune system, the smallest little thing can be too much.
Yeah.
So that's where the difficulties with sicknesses and pest management are really decimating the beekeeping industry. Varroa mite is one of the biggest pests that beekeepers face today, where they get into the cells where an egg has been laid before it's sealed, and they feed on the hemolymph,
Mm.
and they feed on the fat bodies of the larvae, and then it impacts their liver, and then that makes it more difficult to have a healthy bee.
Right.
So you get deformed wing virus, you get several different things that inhibit the bee's ability to function at the capacity that they need to function. You have small hive beetle, you have nosema, all these different things. It's kind of just pick your choice of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mhm.
It's almost feels like death by a thousand cuts sometimes.
Yeah. Like the bee
And it's
movie
a
would have been a lot darker if they had included all this stuff.
yes. Had it been
Just like
made now, it'd be much
insomniac
darker.
bees, just like, oh, I can't even sleep because of these stupid pesticides.
Bees going through withdrawals.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's not a pretty picture. I don't think Pixar or Disney's going to pick that one up.
No.
No
Probably
danger of
not.
that. But we really work to focus on limiting pesticide exposure as much as possible. And that's one of the reasons that we're semi-sedentary. We're not moving all over the place following pollination crops. We're trying to stay as local as possible. We're trying to steer clear of cotton, trying to steer clear as far as we can, and as difficult as it is, from corn in this
Mhm.
area. So I mean, whether it's a seed treated with pesticides, so it's not sprayed, but it's still in the plant, and they've shown that the gutate on the plant. So in the morning, the dew that forms on the leaves can contain a little bit of this pesticide.
Mm.
And so if your bees are foraging for water and they're drinking dew off the leaves of corn plant, well, that's not great. And so it's very difficult to find really good locations that have the honey plants and the pollen plants that we're looking for, but don't have that exposure. And it's impossible, really. So it's just a matter of degree. It's a matter of limiting it as much as possible. I mean, there's a reason that there's really no organic honey made in the U.S. With bees' forage radius, you have to be able to certify that nothing was sprayed within 2 miles of your beehive. So unless you own a 2-mile radius
Yeah.
all around you, you're not going to be able to have anything certified organic. All the organic honey in the U.S. is being imported from different countries. Brazil is one of the main ones. So we're just trying to limit that exposure as much as possible. We feed our beehives protein patties that are made from plant protein to give them the proper amino acids that they need, proper nutrients. Because like I
Veggie
mentioned
burgers
earlier,
for bees.
it really just depends. Veggie burgers. This is one of the new versions of the protein patties that are all plant-based. And so it's about making sure there's no deficiencies in their diet. Which if you're just relying on the pollen in your area, depending on your area, it may not have everything that they need. Even if you do have a really diverse ecosystem, it still may not have everything that you need. So we just make sure that we're able to provide proper nutrition. We try to leave as much honey on the hives as we can, and supplement that in drought years, whichever way that we can, and to be able to stay on top of mites and sicknesses and testing regularly for those to make sure they're healthy.
Yeah, you mentioned so CCD, colony collapse disorder, did Walker Honey Farm have to deal with that significantly, or are y'all still dealing with that?
We have. We didn't feel it as acutely as many other beekeepers in different places felt it when it first hit. But we definitely feel kind of the lasting and chronic impacts of it, to where hive loss over winter is, and even sometimes during spring and summer, is much higher than it used to be. It's getting very difficult and expensive to keep bees alive. And so there's people that report, I think the national average is somewhere around 40% losses every year in hives, which is insane. That's really, really crazy. So this past winter, our losses set somewhere around 15 to 20%, which is great. And I really do credit that with, taking care of our mite population, keeping that low. We'll talk a little bit more about how we do that later. Making sure the bees have proper nutrition, leaving as much honey on them as we can. And even, the crazy winter storm that we had, from our numbers we lost, I was expecting 1 out of every 4 hives to be dead. It was below freezing for so long.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. How did y'all weather that?
We did okay. It was about probably between 5 and 10%. And I mean, honestly, those were probably some stragglers that were just kind of barely holding on anyways. And so we made it through much better than I expected. A lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah, I'd imagine. I had one other question about, so you raise honeybees, correct?
Yes.
And so honeybees aren't native to the United States, right?
They are not. They came in, the European settlers brought them in the 17th century, which is, no, they're not native. But then there's the question of, how many centuries are required.
What is native? What's naturalized?
To consider something native, because they're feral bees all across North America. That you've got swarms coming over from hives that were brought over that spread across. So they've naturalized and adapted very well.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, do honeybees raised on farms, are they a significant competition factor for local bees that are, feral or solitary bees?
There really hasn't been any studies done to show that they are. And I think the biggest, there's two big factors there. One is specialization, and the other is just numbers. I mean, the sheer numbers of bees in a managed colony on average are going to be about 50,000. Most native bees are not going to be anywhere near that in their colonies. And two, a lot of native species are very specialized. So there's only certain plants that they're really worried about. And bees really, as long as their tongue, proboscis, as long as that can fit down in and get some nectar out of some, they can get some pollen out, they really don't care. Those are not super specialized. We have one apiary where there is a whole lot of thistle that blooms there. And when we go to that yard and it's blooming, I see butterflies everywhere. And the butterflies are the only ones on that plant because their tongue can reach down to get the nectar out, but bees can't.
Yeah,
And
bees
so
imagine bees would be a little bit too small for those.
right.
Old
And so
flowers.
there are a lot of, just an example of how that's not exact competition there because of that specialization of that specific plant and that butterfly. And so I think they work hand in hand pretty well. That, and we really take care to not oversaturate an area. So we're not going to drop 500 hives at a location. One, that just wouldn't be smart from our point of view because there's not going to be enough resources for all those hives and they're going to suffer. And so we do take care to assess the area and only put as many hives as that area can manage. So if we know there's going to be a bloom there are tons of flowers that are going to be blooming over this period of time and it can handle 80 to 100 hives at that location, then we can do that over a short duration. But most of the time we're going to have 40 to 50 hives in a specific 2-mile radius, which is just, there's plenty for them.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we could talk to you all afternoon because this is all really interesting. But we're about at time. So Nafisa, would you like to wrap us up with our final question?
Yeah. So that was all really great information. We just kind of want to wonder, what do you think the future of honey farming looks like? Like, is it more sustainable or is it like, what do you think it would look like?
I wish I had a happy, fun answer for that
don't
question.
worry, we're all about the doom and gloom on
The
this.
doom and gloom. Unfortunately, I think it's pretty bleak unless we're able to manage the pesticide use. I know there are certain classes of pesticides that are usable here in the U.S. that are banned in Europe just because of their impact. But it's a fine line to walk. I mean, I think we do need some pesticides at this point. We're so reliant on food production and crops that if we have something come in that wipes out all the corn, we have some sort of plague of a pest that wipes out all the corn in the South, we're going to be really, really hurting to people. So I understand the need, but it's a really weird balance to strike. So we either have to find some sort of magic bullet that only kills off the pests that we don't like and doesn't harm the productive insects. That'd be great. Unfortunately, I think we're gonna be waiting a long time for that. Or we have to really dump a bunch of money into research to be able to figure out how we can balance this more productively. That's kind of the future I see in the industry of beekeeping. In the honey industry, there's been difficulty for a while, and it goes into a little bit of depth on the Netflix show Rotten, that first episode of Lawyers, Guns, and Honey that we're actually featured in.
Cool.
It goes into the different impacts of transshipped honey, of adulterated honey, that really kind of undermine the American honey market, which is really impactful and hurtful to the American beekeeper. So industry-wise, we're going to have to do something about cheaper foreign imports wrecking the market and making a lot of beekeepers quit and get out of the business. So if we're less reliant on some some pollination prospects. I know we still have to pollinate. We're kind of deep in that hole. We really, really need it. But
Yeah.
industry-wise, we're going to have to make some changes there to make things more sustainable for the American beekeeper. But for the future of beekeeping practices, there's actually some really interesting things that are being worked on. There's a company called BeeWise that's creating this retrofitted cargo container that manages all the colonies with AI. So they have cameras that, this AI is trained to identify varroa mites and offer treatment. And there's weight sensors for when it's full of honey. Because beekeeping technology really hasn't changed much since the 1700s. So it's the same style boxes, same everything.
Wow.
It's the Langstroth style hive that's been used since then. And so there's a lot of the big pollination industries actually are funding and putting money towards, I believe it's an Israeli company that's working on these containers that have 40 colonies of bees in them, and you just drop a container in your orchard, and the growers don't have to worry about hives that were brought in dying because they weather spray or whatever it is. You've got constant monitoring of them, so they're able to know by weights of the hives and activity that pollination is occurring. It's more difficult to prove that when you've got traditional style beehives sitting there. So it's kind of cool, but at the same time, it's like, well, you still need beekeepers. Like, I don't want to. How excited can I be for a technology that's gonna, put some industry people out of business? But it looks really, really cool.
Oh, dang, that's a conundrum right there. Well, thank you so much, Blake. Thank you for sharing your bee knowledge with us. It's all super interesting.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share the knowledge, happy to help educate and get the word out about bees.
Yeah, maybe after Corona, we can take a field trip to the Walker Honey Farm.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I'd be happy to show you all around.
Awesome. All right, do we have some news, Nafisa?
Yeah, just very short. On the 25th, we have the Georgetown Green Film Series. We're going to be screening Chasing Coral, which is about the disappearance of coral reefs. So definitely stay on the lookout for details about that. And that's all the news we have.
Yeah, like I said, doom and gloom. That's what we're all about. It's not anything that has sustainability in the name isn't going to be very positive.
All right.
All right, well, thank you all for listening.